Okay, we're gonna have a little bit of knit therapy here today. And we're gonna Hello, I'm Dr. L. I'm a Dr. L of knitting. I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway, I'm gonna say 2 words. I'm gonna say 2 words and you tell me how you feel when you hear them. Okay, let me know down in the comments below. What do you feel when I say provisional cast on? No! Oh my God, what is that? If you had any of those reactions, I am here today to help you because I am here to tell you and to prove to you that there is no reason to fear or avoid a provisional cast on, because the wonderful thing about knitting is there's always more than one way to do something, and it's really more about finding the technique and the method that works for you and makes sense for you. So hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, give this video a thumbs up, and learn 3 ways to do a provisional cast on. So I personally always like to kind of know how something works in a broad way before I see how it's done. It just helps me wrap my mind around it. And I think provisional cast-ons is a type of cast-on where it really does help to know what is happening in order to understand how to do them. I'm going to give a little overview of how they work, what they are, what they are used for. If you're not interested in all that, you're like, Carrie, I know what they're used for, I just want to get to the cast-on methods. Don't worry, down in the description box, I have timestamps to different parts of the video. So if there's something you want to get to right away, you can easily. Also down in the description box, you're gonna find a list of resources and materials that I think are relevant to today's video. Some of these will have clearly marked affiliate links. If you use one of those links to do some shopping, I earn a small commission that does help me support my channel so I can keep doing this. If you utilize one of my affiliate links or just leave me a super thanks or buy me a coffee or any kind of tip, it is so greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for that additional bit of support. Okay, enough of the plugs. Let's jump into some provisional cast-on theory. So right here I have this swatch. The way our knitting normally works is we cast on and then we knit above the cast on edge and we knit in one direction. What a provisional cast on does is it allows you to knit on either side of the original cast on edge. All right, but why do you need to be able to do that sometimes? Or why might a designer want you to do that? Well, there's a couple situations. One is for symmetry. Symmetry is a very, very big thing in knitting. And especially in lace knitting, when knitting like maybe a rectangular stole or a scarf, and there is a directional stitch pattern. If you were to knit just end to end from cast on to bind off, and then you drape it over your shoulders, that directional stitch pattern is gonna be pointing up on one side and down on the other side. So to make everything symmetrical, what you can do is use a provisional cast on in the middle of the scarf and knit out in both ways, and you keep the stitch pattern symmetrical on both sides. The other time that you might want to use a provisional cast on is in projects that are knit flat and then the beginning and end are grafted together. For example, I have this hat. This is the Azula hat by Woolly Wormhead, and you would guess that this would be knit in the round. However, it's not. This hat is actually knit side to side, and it's knit flat using short rows, and then either end is joined back together with a graft. And you would be hard pressed to know where I began knitting this hat, where it actually starts. A provisional cast on is going to give you a seamless look. So it looks like it's just one continuous piece of fabric that was knitted. The tricky thing about provisional cast-ons, however, is that how a lot of them work use a aspect of knitting that not a lot of knitters fully know about, and that is it utilizes something called the upside down stitches.
This illustrates a row of knit stitches, and if I were to take this and turn it upside down, well, it still looks like a row of knit stitches. And this has to do with the symmetry of knitting.
If you're curious about upside down stitches, how they work, what it is I'm talking about, I have a whole knitting secrets revealed video about it. I will link it up here and down in the description box below if you want to check that out. So with all that said, let's jump in and just start looking at how we can do some provisional cast-ons. And I'm going to start off with the easiest cast-on there is. In fact, you don't even have to know about upside down stitches to do it. If you can wrap yarn around 2 sticks, you can do this cast on. So the Turkish Twist cast on, it's not just the easiest way to cast on for a provisional cast on and have a provisional edge. It's also probably the easiest cast on to do generally. The thing that's really cool about this cast on as a provisional cast on, besides being super straightforward, is that it gives you an equal number of stitches on either edge of your cast on. That's not necessarily the case with the next 2 provisional cast ons I'm going to talk about. I'll get into that later, but just know that one big advantage of the Turkish Twist cast on is you get an equal set of loops on both sides. So there's a lot going for this cast on. There's a lot going for it. So let's just jump in and see how we do it. For this cast on, obviously you're gonna need your needles, ball of yarn, and then you're going to need something to act as a stitch holder. It can be scrap yarn, that's always readily available. If you have barber cord, a long enough barber cord, you can use that. I'm going to go ahead and just use a circular needle. I highly recommend that your second needle is smaller than the working needle. I would go down at least 1, if not 2, maybe even 3 stitches. I think you'll see why once we get started. I've got my ball of yarn, I've got my main needle here, I've got my second circular needle, and I'm going to just hold them together like this, parallel to each other.
I'm then going to make a slip knot to put on my main needle.
This slip knot will not count as a stitch. We will not work into this slip knot. The slip knot is just there to kind of help anchor the yarn to make it easier to wrap. So I'm going to grab my working yarn here, and I'm just going to bring it forward towards me and then over the top of the needle and back. That's 1 wrap, and that is casting on your first stitch. And I'm just going to wrap around however many stitches I need for my project. Yes, that's what this is. It is just wrapping the yarn around the needle. Got my 15 loops here on these 2 needles. These are going to be loops I can now work into. Here's the tricky bit. I'm going to keep hold of this working yarn. I don't want to let go. I'm going to take my needles and I'm going to swing them around towards me. And I want to make sure that this second needle stays on the bottom.
I'm almost ready to start knitting, but first I'm going to take my secondary needle and pull it so the bottom part of the wraps are sitting on the cable of that second circular needle.
Now I'm going to make sure I grab my working needle. This is also important. Make sure you grab your working needle and not your secondary needle. You want to make sure that you're working with your correct needle. All right, and now I'm just going to knit into these loops as if they were stitches. So the first one's a little tricky, it's a little unstable, but just put your needle through like you would and knit your first stitch. It's really important that when you do this for a provisional cast on, that you don't twist those loops. You want to keep them open like regular stitches. That's going to keep everything looking like a continuous piece of fabric when we're done with this technique. It might feel a little loose. Don't worry, it will all even out and stabilize. Just keep working into those loops as if they were stitches. There we go. Here is that slip stitch that I put on to anchor my yarn. Do not knit into it. I'm not ready to pull that slip stitch out, so I'm gonna just transfer it onto my right needle. Tidy that up. Now I'm gonna turn my work, and look, I've got little purl bumps there because I'm knitted into this. If you are familiar with Judy's Magic Cast On, that should look really familiar because that's what a Judy's Magic Cast On looks like when you're done casting on. And if you want to extrapolate from that, what I'm showing you right now, you could substitute a Judy's Magic Cast On and get the exact same effect. So yes, Judy's Magic Cast On can be used as a provisional cast on. At this point, this secondary needle is just acting as a stitch holder. I could easily take these tips off and just put some end caps on it, and it's just a stitch holder dangling down from my work, which is what I would normally do. But I, with my main stitches up here on my working needle, can start working.
On this second row, I still have that slip knot, so I'm going to slip it to my other needle so I don't work into it. And I will just pull that out when I come back to it next time. In the meantime, I will just keep purling across this second row.
All right, so I have been knitting back and forth for a bit, and here you can start to see how this looks. Let's say that I am done with these stitches and I want to start knitting in the opposite direction. Well, I could go ahead and cast off these stitches and that would free up these needle tips. But I'm using the same interchangeable system, so all I need to do to switch to knitting this side is to move my tips. I don't even have to transfer stitches. So that is Turkish Twist being used as a provisional cast on. And I think this is the easiest way to go about it. There are some pitfalls with it. The biggest pitfall is just kind of getting the right tension on those first set of loops because it can get a little loose. It's not the most stable cast on in the world, and that's why I actually usually prefer using Judy's Magic Cast On for this type of technique. If you want to see a video where I am specifically using Judy's Magic Cast On as a provisional cast on, it's what I am basically doing in this video on how to do a tubular cast on utilizing Judy's Magic Cast On. And I have another video where I showed how to do Judy's Magic Cast On when casting on for toe-up socks. So I'm gonna link those videos down below so you have them, but hands down, if you're looking for a way to cast on provisional stitches with the least amount of stress that works really well overall, Turkish Twist. So if using Turkish Twist as a provisional cast on is so easy, or Judy's Magic Cast On is so easy, why do you need any other? Well, remember this hat earlier in the video? If you look closely at it, you'll see that every single row has a color change in it. This needed to be cast on so that I could have a color change in my first row of knitting, and trying to do that with something like Turkish Twist was a little like mind blown. Couldn't even conceive of it. And so that's when I turned to what is probably my second favorite way to do a provisional cast on, which is the crochet cast on. So for this technique, you are going to need scrap yarn. You need to make sure you have enough scrap yarn to make a chain. The chain needs to be the number of stitches to cast on plus like 10 to 15 extra chains. You'll see why as we go into this. But you need waste yarn that is a contrasting color to your main yarn. And it needs to be about the same weight as your main yarn. And it needs to be a slippery yarn. You want to use cotton, acrylic, superwash wool, just something that will very easily unravel when you're done knitting and you're ready to pick up your stitches on the other side of that cast on edge. Then you need a crochet hook. Now the crochet hook needs to be appropriate for the yarn that you are using. So let's get started on this technique.
Hey, Ed and Carrie here. 2 quick things I wanted to add. 1. I'm demonstrating one of two ways that you can do a crochet provisional cast on. I have a video where I demonstrate the other way, which I will link up here and down in the description box below. Also, I'm going to assume that you know how to make a crochet slip stitch chain. If you don't, I have a video, crochet skills every knitter needs to know, which will be very useful for you. But for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to get into the details of how to do a crochet slip stitch chain. Okay, on with the demo. I'm going to start by putting a slip knot onto my crochet hook here, and then I'm going to slip stitch chain about 5 stitches. You just want to have a long enough chain to hold on to for the next step.
All right, so I've got my chain on my crochet hook. Here's where the tricky bits start to come in. I'm going to pick up my main needle and I'm going to put them side by side like that.
Next, I'm going to tension the yarn in my left hand as though I'm going to crochet, well, because I am, and then I'm going to grab my knitting needle with my left hand, keeping that yarn tensioned.
And notice the yarn is coming underneath the needle. I'm going to take my crochet hook, I'm going to bring it over the top of my knitting needle. I'm going to bring the crochet hook underneath the yarn. I'm going to grab that yarn and pull it over the knitting needle and then through the loop of yarn on my crochet hook. So now here I am. I've got a loop of yarn on my needle and I've got a loop of yarn on my crochet hook, and my yarn is up here above both of these yarn devices. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my yarn, I'm going to bring it in between the needle and the crochet hook, underneath the knitting needle, and back into position 1. And there we go. And this is how it should look after you've completed all the steps. You have a loop of yarn on your knitting needle. That is your first cast on stitch. You have a loop of yarn on your crochet hook. That is not a stitch. Do not count it. My yarn is underneath the knitting needle. Okay? Don't worry, we're going to see this a lot as the video goes along, and I'll even give you a slow-mo of it.
We start in position 1. I'm going to take my crochet hook. I'm going to bring it over the top of the knitting needle. That's position 2.
I'm going to take my crochet hook, bring it underneath the yarn, position 3. I'm going to then grab the yarn with my crochet hook and I'm going to slip that stitch through the yarn on my crochet hook. Thusly.
And that is position 4.
I take my working yarn, I bring it in between the needles and back underneath the knitting needle, and we are back to position 1. I now have 2 stitches on my knitting needle and 1 loop of yarn on my crochet hook. So I've casted on 2 stitches. This is a bit of yarn gymnastics that we're doing with going over and everything, but once you get the overall rhythm of this, it goes by very quickly. It really is just understanding that you are moving this yarn in between the needle and the hook and underneath the knitting needle, and that you're bringing the crochet hook over the knitting needle to grab the yarn and crochet chain through that loop on your crochet hook. And then you've got these loops of yarn on your knitting needle. Those loops of yarn are the humps of the crochet slip stitch chain. It's just that you're putting them onto your knitting needle as you make your slip stitch chain. That's all that's going on here. So I'm going to keep doing this until I have 15 stitches on my knitting needle. Now I have all of my stitches casted on to my knitting needle. I am ready to finish off the crochet chain. So I'm going to just take my needle. Right now I'm going to just pull this out so it's out of my way. And I'm going to crochet chain 3 or 4 more stitches.
When I do my last crochet chain, I break the yarn because I don't need any more of this scrap yarn. And then I take that final loop that's on my crochet hook and I put it on a stitch marker.
And that's gonna make it easier for me to unravel this chain after we're done knitting. All right, so there is my crochet chain already set up on my needle. Now all I have to do is start knitting.
So I'm going to grab my main yarn and I'm going to just join this in as if I were joining a new ball of yarn. But I'm not going to use any knots or anything like that because I'm going to be unraveling this scrap yarn in the end. So I'm just going to add in the new ball of yarn and start knitting.
All right, so here's my completed sample.
And we're going to start picking up stitches to knit in the opposite direction.
But there's something I want to note to you really quickly about this kind of provisional cast on.
Here you can see the white crochet slip stitch chain, and there's these little pink blips. Those pink blips are the quote-unquote purl bumps of the upside down stitches, and that's what we're going to be picking up. But there's something really important to know about upside down stitches.
If you count these bumps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, but I cast it on 15 stitches. So I end up with one less stitch on my cast on edge. And this just has to do with the nature of working into upside down stitches when you're working flat. If I were doing this in the round, it wouldn't be an issue, and I have an equal number of stitches. Again, it has to do with the way upside down stitches work. This is just all knitting physics, so take my word for it. If you want an equal number of stitches on both sides of your cast on edge, what do? Well, there's a couple of options. The easiest option is to, if you look, there's this little blip right there. It's not a stitch, all right? That's not a purl bump. That's not a running thread. That is actually a little bit of the edge stitch that gets captured. And I'm gonna just pick that up as though it were a stitch and just kind of make a stitch out of it to get an even number of stitches.
So let's go ahead and start picking up our stitches.
All right, so I'm gonna grab actually a thinner needle than my working needle. It makes picking up these stitches a little bit easier, and I like to pick them up before I, release the kraken of this crochet chain. I don't know where that came from. I have the purl side facing me, so I'm gonna take my needle, I'm gonna bring it to the back and insert it from the back. And that way, when I'm done picking up stitches, all of them will be mounted in the Western mount, which is what I'm used to seeing, with the right leg to the front of the needle. As I pick up, I just want to make sure that I'm just picking up my stitches and I'm not picking up anything of the crochet chain. This is one of the reasons it's really important to use a contrasting color. All right, here's my 14th stitch. All right, but there's that little bump right there that almost looks like it were a stitch, so I'm gonna just pick that up as though it were, and I should have 15 loops on my needle. Now that we've got those stitches picked up on the needle, I can now unravel my chain. So another reason I like to use a stitch marker is that it clearly marks where the end of my chain is, because that's where I want to unravel from. So I take my stitch marker off, and this is like the coolest part of this technique. It is like, it's cool, just watch. I just unravel my chain. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Look, oh, so satisfying. Just boom, 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 boom. It's like magic. It's like a magic trick. Yeah. And there we go. All of the stitches are on my needle and ready to knit in the opposite direction. So that is my preferred method for a provisional crochet cast on. However, the big disadvantage is it is a bit of yarn Olympics. You gotta know a few different techniques to pull it off. and it's a little fiddly and you may not enjoy that. You may not have a crochet hook. You may not have a crochet hook. Like, that's possible. So what do? Does that just leave Turkish Twist? No. No, it does not. Because there is a way of doing a provisional cast on that works with whatever cast on you want to use. So to do this, what are you gonna need? You're gonna need a fair amount of scrap yarn, but you're gonna need enough scrap yarn to cast on all of your cast on stitches and knit probably, I would say to be safe, like 3 to 5, maybe a couple more rows of plain stockinette. Your scrap yarn needs to be the kind of scrap yarn that you would use for a provisional cast on. So let's just get into how to do this. So I'm gonna cast on 15 stitches, which is what I've been doing. And I'm gonna use my long tail cast on because that's my favorite. But if you prefer knitted on cast on or anything like that, that's fine too. Whatever you want. It's whatever standard cast on you use. All right, 15 stitches cast on. Now I'm going to knit a few rows. Like I said, I like to do 3 to 5 rows. You kind of just want to have enough that you can clearly see where your last row of waist stitches are versus your first row of actual stitches. All right, so here I am, and I have knitted all my rows, and I'm going to now join in my main color, just like I would with the crochet chain method. All right, so I'm gonna just keep knitting like that until I have enough of my main color to feel good, and we'll talk about releasing the upside down stitches from their cage of waste yarn. All right, so here is my finished bit of knitting. All right, enough for you to see what's happening. And you can see clearly a stripe between the pink and the brown, but let's look on the back side. And again, I want you to take notice of right here. You can see these pink purl bumps, right? That's the last row of knitting from their waist yarn. And then you see these little brown blips underneath. Those are the brown running threads of the first row of our main color. But watch what happens when I turn it all upside down. Those brown bumps now look like the purl stitches. So just like with the crochet provisional cast on, I'm going to pick up into these brown purl bumps before I unravel this pink waist yarn.
Okay, I'm getting here to the end, and again, I'm going to be 1 stitch short because I'm picking up into these upside down stitches. So you see that little blip of a brown bump there? I'm going to pick that up as if it were a stitch. This is just like what I did with the crochet cast on.
We are now ready to unravel our stitches.
I've already cut my waist yarn away from the little ball of waist yarn I had, so I can just take this needle and pull at each leg to unravel this.
It's not quite as satisfying as the crochet cast on, where it's like pop, 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 but it absolutely works. And there we go. It works beautifully. So yes, you can do a provisional if you can do a cast on, you can do a provisional cast on with some waist yarn. Of course, the big disadvantage of this is if you have lots and lots of stitches, you need lots and lots of waist yarn to do it. And you are going to be doing a little extra bit of knitting because you have to knit those extra rows. But to be able to do a provisional cast on in any situation, no matter what your overall skill level as a knitter, I think is really cool. There are many methods to doing a provisional cast on besides the 3 I just showed and the couple of others that appear in other videos of mine. And if you would like to explore more ways to do cast-ons, whether they're provisional cast-ons or standard cast-ons or whatever kind of cast-on, I highly recommend the book Cast On, Bind Off 211 Ways to Begin and End Your Knitting by Cap Cease. I absolutely love this resource. I have it on my Kindle, so if there's ever a time I have a question about doing a certain kind of cast on, I have easy access to it. And I use it constantly. Like, even cast-ons that I know how to do where maybe I'm having like a brain freeze, I'm like, wait, how does that work? I go to this book. So if you're interested in it, you will find a link to it down in the description box. It is a clearly marked affiliate link. So if you use that link to do some shopping, thank you so much. It does help support my channel. As far as these provisional cast-ons, why would I choose to use one of them over another? Some of it is a matter of personal preference and some of it is a matter of circumstance. So my medallion washcloths, which have been seen on my channel many times, I almost always actually use either Turkish Twist or Judy's Magic Cast On for that. That kind of cast on for a small project where I'm going to be grafting 2 ends together and it's nice to just have an equal number of stitches on both sides of the cast on edge is ideal for a Turkish Twist cast on or a Judy's Magic Cast On. And really those tend to be my preferred methods for provisional cast ons. The only time I don't really use them is when I like a special situation like this hat. Again, hello lovely. Hello, it's so nice to see you again. But this hat, because again, it had a unique situation of having a color change in the middle of the first row. I like to use crochet cast on for when I'm going to do a provisional cast on for a project that is in the round, because the fact that there is one less in the round stitch is not an issue, because there is not. In the round, there are equal a number of upside down stitches to regular stitches. The other time that I would choose the crochet provisional cast on is just if there's a very large number of stitches that need to be cast on provisionally. In that case, I think that the crochet provisional cast on is ideal, or if you prefer, you can use the waste yarn method that we looked at today. So now that we're through all this, I gotta ask, has your feelings about provisional cast on changed since the start of the video? Do they seem a little less intimidating? If you've been avoiding them in the past, are you willing to give one of these methods a try? Which one? And I'd love to know about why down in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you have a wonderful day, evening, weekend, weeknight, whenever you may be watching this. And as always, happy health and happy making. Bye! Today, I am here for you because I'm here to tell you that there is no reason to fear the provisional cast-ons. Almost spit on my lip. So we're gonna need that later. Pay no attention to the swatches behind the curtains. Okay, 4-finger. Darn it. Is there a way of doing provisional cast-ons without any crochet hook? Why did it take me so long to find that word? We love things to be symmetrical. Why can't I say that? However, it's not my favorite technique. Burps. Burps, 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 burps. Burps. Okay.